Hi guys, Alex here. Welcome to episode 149 of the Trademate Sports Betting Podcast. Today I'm joined by Pro Sports Bettor, also known as MLBKS Psychic on Twitter, but you can also call him Porter. Welcome to the podcast, mate.
Hey, Alex. Great having me on.
Yeah, mate. Pleasure having you on. I've heard you on a couple of other podcasts, and I really enjoyed what you had to say on those podcasts. Always, it was a super, really interesting listen for myself. So I thought it would be a no-brainer to get you on our podcast over here. But for those who haven't heard of you before, or just need a little recap, do you want to just give us a introduction to yourself, how you got involved in sports betting? And you also mentioned to me that I guess Trademate Sports helped you out a little bit in getting your journey started. So it'd be interesting to hear about that also.
Yeah, definitely. So I think my story is how most guys kind of probably get into this field. My background was in math and economics. I was a professional poker player. I worked a little bit abroad as an economist. Wasn't too satisfied with that life there. Came back to the States and I started playing DFS and daily fantasy sports and a little bit of poker again. And then I had two friends sort of introduce me to sports betting. One of them was a poker buddy. One of them was a DFS guy. And the first guy kind of told me, hey, check out this site, Trademates. And I was like, okay, what's this about? And I sort of went through, how this is, I think you guys changed the sites. This is 6 years ago. But, back then it was something equivalent of kind of showing you, basically it was really about CLV, closing line value. And it would show you, where the line was different than where other sharp sites thought it should be. And really you could kind of go chasing around and, capture CLV, I guess. And I did that for a little bit. I did a little bit of kind of slightly kind of trying it on my own, like kind of converting DFS stats. And then I read another article on SBR forums about CLV again, but that guy's name is pretty famous out there. His name's Poker Joe. And it kind of clicked at that point. I kind of wanted to do things different and on my own. So after I kind of really understood that article, your guys' software, kind of modeling, I kind of totally disappeared from even knowing gambling Twitter or anything like that existed, and just really sort of did things on my own. It wasn't really until COVID came around that I kind of found gambling Twitter again and some Slack Discords that talked about sports. But there was a good solid 3 years where I just kind of was totally off the radar doing my own thing, but in sports betting.
Yeah, I'm not here to plug Trademate at all, but the good thing is if you use the software or even if you do a trial or whatever, it's kind of it almost forces you to learn, because it's not like any other form of getting picks or anything like that. Like normally if you're getting tips or picks, whatever you want to call it, you're getting sent it at a certain time every week, etc., etc. Whereas it works in real time, and I guess you learn, that you learn about CLV. It's like in the software that you learn, how big your closing edge ended up by the time the game started and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I having used it myself and when I first started using it, it was it's pretty easy way to like force yourself to learn it, because if you're getting picks from a tipster, what do you guys have a different name for tipsters over in the touts? You don't really use much brain power at all. It's very much just like, it seems like you're only getting on because you think that this guy likes this team because he thinks they're good, and you know what I mean. So the Trademate's just all about the numbers, so it kind of forces you to learn a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say over the ages I've slightly evolved, especially because I kind of focus on smaller markets. So I think out there, most people would say that I'm not a CLV truther, but I think the base of understanding sports betting, that's like where you should start.
Yeah, 100%.
It's just not.
Yeah, you need to understand that it's about odds and probabilities rather than or about numbers. It's got nothing to do with or I mean it can, but it's not much to do with who you think's going to win and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, you become a pro sports bettor, and you talked about would you say you were professional for 3 years before you, I guess, started meeting people on Twitter and stuff like that?
Yeah, so how I originally started was I would just kind of grind all day. I'd get, some accounts from friends, some connects, some more accounts, and I just kind of sat alone and all day grinded away. And as the business kind of got bigger, I realized, hey, actually, this is more like a startup. This isn't just sports betting. It's not, okay, so it's important to win. Obviously, you need to win to turn a profit. But I think today there's this really overemphasis on trying to win versus what to do once you're a winner. It's kind of like this dead end path. And I would say that most winners today, they're more math, engineering, econ, computer sci focused people. And you kind of need some other skills in this industry to really scale. And that really involves sort of networking and building out your operation. And today I just find there's all this, picks, win, kind of, get CLV, and there's just nothing anywhere discussed. And probably because the people who kind of know don't really want to say too much, but there's just absolutely nothing discussed about the actual sports betting as a like business, and not just clicking buttons and trying to find winners. And a lot of the industry, even the companies that are teaching you good stuff, how to win, how to try to win, it's kind of a dead end profession if you're just, one side skilled at the numbers and modeling and just have zero understanding of the business entrepreneurial component of the industry.
Yeah, well, it's not as a sexy topic, is it, mate?
No, it's not. People just want winners.
Exactly, but no, you make a tremendous point that I would guess the reason we don't hear too much about the business side is because everyone's kind of fighting each other for accounts. I guess trying
Frenemies.
to, yeah, exactly. So, yeah. People aren't really going to give away their tricks of the trade that's like almost the most important part for syndicates and bigger enterprises that, or just better sports bettors. That's their biggest problem, getting accounts. So for those who don't know, what is your approach to sports betting at the moment? I know you're very heavily focused on props, so maybe you want to go into why you chose to bet props as opposed to these bigger markets.
Yeah, so it's a double-edged sword. So obviously the smaller the market, it's just obvious anything in life. If there's less people doing it, you're just going to have a bigger edge. So the moment you notice that the big groups are sort of, what's the term, poo-pooing on down looking down on guys betting props, I sort of realized that there was a niche completely missing for someone trying to get bigger. Because what's the logic between running and giving me accounts for a major market when there's a lot of other established guys betting it? Even though we're talking about like 3-4% ROI, what can I do to sort of stand out when, okay, so for an audience member to kind of visualize this, 2, 3, 4%, it's more like 2% ROI. The swings are massive. It's hard for a casual that's giving counts to really comprehend what it even means. I mean, card counters can really put it together because they go through major swings, in blackjack, for example. But in sports betting, it's really hard for the casual to understand. Yeah, I'm winning, but it's a 2% ROI. So the way to really stick out, I figured, was find these markets that have a much larger ROI, 8, 9, 10, 11%, and that makes partnerships a lot easier, where you're kind of taking smaller guys that, they're not looking to have big swings. And I just try to fill a niche that I felt no one was really doing on a large scale. Don't get me wrong, there's tons of people betting props, but I don't feel like it's kind of laughed upon that you could do this on like a large hundreds of account scale, but that's true. It's, if no one's trying to do it, then no one's doing it, and then someone fills in the gap, someone's doing it. So I just thought it'd be impossible to fill in the gap. And personally, I just love the swings. I'd rather work harder on finding accounts and networking than banging my head against the wall at 2-3% ROI.
Yeah. So were you always betting props, or was there I guess an evolution in your betting where you figured out that props were the most logical way?
So props were a natural. Yeah, props were a natural progression from DFS. But the truth is, I did look at straights, and because I didn't know people on gambling Twitter, I didn't really understand the 2-3%. This was in the early days. I still didn't have a good grasp, because today you can kind of see how much movement there is. You can approximate what your ROI was, but I was a lot less developed back then. I just did bet straights, and it was actually winning. And I was just like, wow, this is crazy, the swings. And then I kind of did the math. I'm like, wow, back then I thought, how big do I have to actually bet to turn a profit at 2-3%? And then I just kind of quickly shifted away from that. And I always just kind of just became known as a specialist for props. And that kind of just served me well when 2% swings mean 2% ROI means large swings. So when these big groups were going through their, downswings, people are kind of coming to me to, hey, help me out here, even though those groups are doing perfectly fine. It's totally expected. So I just thought it was a great niche to gather, accounts, basically liquidity, to be able to bet more.
Yeah. Did you ever try and gather accounts or get accounts from people when you were betting bigger markets? And because I'd like to hear the comparison between, I guess, the relationship you have with the guys you get accounts from now, as opposed to when you're having bigger markets. Because as you said, there's a lot more variance when, the ROI is a lot smaller. So I'd love to hear, like, if there was a bit more, I guess, friction between account holders and yourself back then.
Actually, I love that question. So no, I actually never try to gather accounts for big markets. I was always obsessed that the partnership went as smoothly as humanly possible for the partner. I was just obsessed that they wouldn't go through swings. They still do experience swings, but try and keep those swings as small as possible, and the opposite. So today I do work with other groups. I do other stuff. It's not just all props. I slowly evolved out of that, even though it's still majority props. And today I kind of nurtured and grew those early partnerships, and now new partnerships, but those early partnerships from guys, it's a lot of college kids that might not have large bankrolls, younger guys that maybe other groups didn't want. But I sort of nurture the relationship that today they can slowly handle the swings of larger markets. Still not the biggest markets, but bigger markets than props.
Yeah. So generally you would think for guys that are gathering accounts and doing bigger markets, they're probably able to get at, tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands down on these bigger markets, you would assume, depending on the league, et cetera, et cetera. For yourself, like, you don't have to, if you don't want to answer the question, it's fine, but how much, like, generally are you able to get on props, assuming it's a a normal 50-50 line, over under on whatever, baseball or ice hockey? I'm not sure exactly what sports you're betting, but is there like a general, maybe the best examples on like a big league, MLB, something like that? I see you posting up a lot of MLB stuff, hence the Twitter name probably. But yeah, can you give us a general idea of like actually how much you're able to get? I mean, obviously it depends on how many accounts you have, etc., but maybe a general idea.
So the major markets still play the same way. It's easier to get that screen name just happens to be that because that's the first sport I started. But I do all the major markets: NFL, NBA, MLB. NFL, you're able to get down the most just because it's a bigger market. MLB is probably the least, but there's a split. So how I look at things is there's the legal markets, like DraftKings, FanDuel, all those sites. And between all those sites on any one play during NFL, it's anywhere between like 1,000 and small five figures. And then PPH, baseball's again probably the least, but you can get small five figures down on most of these props. Now don't forget, a lot of these are you're splitting with the account holder the percentages, but you can get down small 5 figures on these player props. Again, that has more to do with the like entrepreneurial work on account side. And I think I just sort of niched my way into like the props guy. So if you were a guy that did 10 different markets, you probably wouldn't be able to do that, even if you were a larger syndicate, not even necessarily Sharp, but like the guy running the syndicate.
Yeah. And when you get new accounts, are you doing any kind of priming or, making it look like you're a bad sports bettor, accumulators? I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do to try and make yourself look like a square bettor.
So on legals, at least in the United States, I tried everything you could think of. Now, by priming and covering, what you really mean is putting in losing bets. So I hope the audience understands that. Priming means losing. Because at the end of the day, so at the end of the day on the legals, no technique, round robining garbage, you name it, it just doesn't work, or it hasn't worked for me. There are some sites that have been more generous than others. Caesars gives an okay leash, FanDuel a little bit, but overall, this is a gathering new accounts journey. That's really what, unfortunately, sports betting has become. And I'm just not a huge fan of doing any of this cover stuff. I'd rather work harder on trying to find more stuff. I mean, think about it like this. How can you really manage, let's say, 100 plus accounts on the PPH side and pick specific accounts to put cover to try and manipulate the book into thinking you're a loser? A wise guy once told me, each book has sort of their limit. I'm not talking about legals, but each book that's taking your bets, the guy's kind of decided beforehand. It's going to let you win somewhere, 5K, 10K, 20K. They sort of have their like bankroll of what they're willing to swallow. And no matter how you cover it up, even if you win, just depends on the guy, not a big book, but like a small guy, even if you beat him on NFL Straight Sunday morning, he's going to be really, really upset and eventually cut you off. So I'm not a huge fan of trying to sort of convince the book that you're a loser, just because in my personal experience over the years, and don't get me wrong, other people say differently, but my personal experience through hundreds, if not thousands of accounts, I have not seen success doing that.
Yeah, I would concur. The best accounts, or the ones that have lasted the longest, are the ones that I've probably lost for a month or so on. So they think you're not very good, but then eventually when you start winning, and maybe the leash will be a bit longer because you lost to start with, but generally, even if you prime lose for maybe 1 week or something like that, and then you start winning, it hasn't made much of a difference for myself too. So
right. So I always pose the question to the person: would you rather win, and these are just random numbers, would you rather win 8K in a month or 10K in 3 months? Probably the first one, and then get on your way to try and find more, unless you're kind of a guy who's like, I'm gonna do one account and retire. I don't know how many people say that, but
Yeah, no, I agree, mate. I agree. So your actual prop betting itself, do you have models, or are you kind of just doing game analysis and coming up with numbers in your head? How do you go ahead with the actual betting side?
Right. So the base is still models. And then, so I used to be just a straight math guy, but as time has evolved, I'm sort of willing to let I guess what people call anecdotal somewhat. And again, this is a small percentage. This still at the end of the day is about models. And a lot of people, honestly, I would say for the general population, if they're actually going to spend time behind the computer, their focus should probably just be figure out how to be quick with the news. Because are you really going to outmodel someone with like an engineering math background? It's even if you get good, what's your next step on like, networking? So don't get me wrong, at the end of the day, math is king. So no matter how much this, conversation talks about all the other components of the business, this is still a math game.
And how's that evolved over the last couple of years? Has it become more competitive? Have the lines become sharper at all? Or do you think, have there been more, I guess, in this scenario, like most of the time your competitors are other sports bettors. So is it have you noticed that there are more sharper guys around and you're not able to pick up on better numbers, or the numbers have gotten worse?
Yeah, so absolutely, actually. So 6 years ago, honestly, you could just click a bunch of unders right before the game time, and things were probably going to work out. To be fair, a lot of sharps are still trying this today, have 90% of their plays as unders, and they're just making a mistake. The market has completely evolved. It's much more closer, at least on American sports, it's much more closer to something like 40% over, 60% unders. I mean, that could just be my own bias. I just feel queasy every time I click an over, to be honest, but that's just how it is today. I mean, there used to be, in the early days, you might bet one over a month, honestly. The whole month, have 200 props, click one over. So it took me a little bit of time to like get more comfortable with it, but it's important to evolve. Which is why I just sort of now am more willing to do some other markets a little bit more, and focus more operationally on growing than on necessarily trying to get 0.25% better each year, or 0.5% better. I mean, there's just like this natural decay. The lines,
Yeah.
no matter how much better I get, the lines are getting sharper every year. I wish I wasn't so pessimistic, but over time, I mean, I would imagine, just based on people's kind of love recently of props, it's kind of, there was an ESPN article about it recently. People just kind of love props, and that just means more eyes on that market and more efficiency on that market. And it's just really important as a sports bettor to just try to keep evolving.
The early going, this is my, I think I would stress out a lot if I was betting on props, just because there's no, I mean, I know that see it, closing line, there's a massive debate around it, but at the end of the day, it's a pretty bloody good marker that if you're betting on a major market, a over under Asian handicap spread, whatever you want to call it, if you're beating that number consistently and you're still losing, it gives you that certain bit of confidence that variance will eventually swing around, and you are doing the right things, and it'll eventually swing around, and you'll start winning. But for props, there's not really any marker to go off. When you were first, maybe because it's sharper now, maybe you can look at the closing lines now and say, you probably disagree with me, but
No,
maybe what
I
about the
disagree.
early, or well, you can talk about it now. I was going to say, what about the early days? Was it stressful at all? If you're going through a bit of a down stretch, you're thinking there's no marker here that tells me if I could be potentially the worst sports bettor in the world, but I've got no idea.
So here's a crazy story. I don't know if I'm lucky or what it is. I don't really believe in luck, but since 2000, so I've had two. Now, remember, I have access to basically all of the props. I'm not talking about like one skin type, one account type, but when you look at it kind of like a mutual fund where you have access to lots and lots of different lines and lots of different props, I personally only have 2 5-week break-even stretches. So I never really thought I was like on the wrong path. I would see sometimes the market, not often, but sometimes the market move against me. And I just thought, great, more liquidity, I'll bet more. So I never really experienced. Now, remember, the market was really soft back then. And in 2017, why I lost basically was I refused to adjust to the Golden State Warriors making every single three-pointer known to man. And the NBA just sort of changed with a three-point line. And I was slow. It was my own fault. I deserved that. You get the work you put in, you kind of get the results you deserve over the long run, of course. I don't mean over any one day. So I never really felt hesitant about how things were going. And I'm absolutely positive that would have happened in major markets where the edge is smaller. It's just the nature of math. 2% means you're going to swing massively. The larger the number is, the less variance you're going to experience.
Yeah, I guess that's the inverse of it all. Although there's no closing line or whatever marker to go off, at least there's going to be less variance. So you'll probably find out pretty quickly if you're good or not, just based on your profit and loss.
I mean, don't get me wrong, you have other downsides. It's absolutely true that compared to major markets, places enjoy prop. The other end enjoys prop bets a lot less than Sunday morning NFL bets or other major markets. It's just a different struggle. It's a different stress. So sure, maybe the variance is lower in terms of the betting, but the, that struggle for the accounts is greater. So while you might be reducing stress one place, you're increasing stress another place.
Yeah. So nowadays, mate, you mentioned to me that you're more of a businessman. I guess you spend most of your time getting accounts and all that fun stuff, which I couldn't really think of a worse job in the world, mate, to be honest.
I hear you.
You've grown into a group. Do you want to I guess tell me how you've grown into getting employees, or I don't know what you refer to them as, but your evolution from just being a one-man operation to bringing people in, and how maybe just tell us like how your team operates and how that's evolved over time.
Yeah, so it ended up really because a lot of these accounts are on credit, so you can't just go on Google or LinkedIn and hire somebody. So my group basically just was people that were friends that were interested in either doing this, whether they knew sports or not. And that just kind of became my core, traders. I don't like calling people employees. That's not nice. Started group friends. And then I sort of, because accounts have a lot of credit. It's think about it like this. So let's say you had $1 million credit line, right? And you paid 0% interest on it. You should probably be turning a profit, right? So as time has evolved, I realized that a lot more of these accounts should be getting use. And besides the props that I do, I sort of not outsource, but I'll take plays from other guys and put them into the accounts. I'd say that accounts for maybe 10% of the business. 90% is still the props, but just to get some other stuff onto these accounts, other markets, other strategies, I'll have some of that. And don't get me wrong, a lot of people they want to be purists. I originate and this is the line, but you know what? If you see a broken line here or there, the money's still green. If this account's probably disappearing anyways, either you do it or someone else out there is going to do it. So, and when they do it, that line's going to come off the board and be taken off. So it might as well be you at that point, whether it's top down, originating, steam chasing, you name it. I'm really not against any of maybe pass posting really increases your odds of being stiff. So that's probably a poor strategy. But in general, I think people are too afraid to sort of do whatever it takes to win. They're not realistic, with their skills probably, and they really should be more open-minded to just figuring out how to win. It doesn't really matter how. Either way, you're either collecting or paying at the end.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And so your guys that you're bringing in, do they have any background at all in betting at all, or are they just
one guy came from DFS. Some of them understand sports. I had some theory. I'm trying with one who doesn't know anything about sports, kind of tabula rasa, kind of blank slate. See how this you can really mold someone. It's interesting. The DFS guy who got me into Trademates, he couldn't name you an NBA player other than LeBron and Steph Curry starting out, but he crushed DFS. So that just kind of goes to show you like this, probably the days of sitting back, at the table discussing with your friends, I like the Saints, today isn't a viable strategy. Maybe in 1970 it was, when that's how the lines were being put together by the other side. But, you're still got to beat some computers today. So it's not that simple.
Yeah. And so teaching them, I guess, are you just giving them the model and saying, just do whatever the model says, or how do you go about that?
What's interesting? It's funny. Even when I talk to them, sometimes they just tell me, "Oh, all I'm doing is inputting," and then you start writing out a workbook of what process you're doing, and all of a sudden it's like, "Wow, this is an entire skill set necessary in this industry on like the larger level." So like each person having their role. I know people would laugh, you're like, "Oh, that guy just does this or that guy just does that." It's unbelievable how important each of these components are, and actually how difficult even something as simple as sounding like you're just inputting is. It's unreal when you have one teaching the other one how to do it. All of a sudden they're like, wow, this is crazy. There's so many intricacies, can I bot here? What's the order of inputting so the lines move slower? There's like line manipulation, what accounts are copied. There's just so many components in like even the smallest, what people would consider a joke of a job, which is just data entry. It's just not like that. It's unbelievably valuable, all these small components that don't even exist in people's like frame of mind when they talk about what sports betting is.
Yeah. How are you, I guess, paying these? Are you giving them like a base salary? You don't have to answer this if you don't want to. Or are you, I guess, rewarding them for, I guess, their own intuition in certain places where they might be going not away from the model, but I guess using their own skill to bet for the group?
Right. So it's a combination. Depends how long you've been on board. Some have a percentage of the business. Some just get paid hourly. It just depends what you're contributing. And I guess they just sort of trust me to pay them fairly. Probably overpay, but whatever.
So for yourself, mate, then what does like a standard day in your life look like then if you're just spending most of your time gathering accounts? Can you give us like a process of what that looks like for you?
Yeah, so it's, well, when you're still overwatching the business and the betting itself, you can't just be disconnected from that. It's amazing how every day there's some new fire to put out. Some account is moving the line, some account got shut down. So, and then there's like endless dealing with all the people that you partner with, settling with them, figuring things out with them, what to do. This person doesn't want to pay. Yeah, it's just like, it's amazing how many fires there are to put out each day. I mean, some days I just think, oh, all right, today's going to be a slow day, and just magically I get stuck on my phone for 5-6 hours talking to 15 different people about 15 different possible issues come up every day. So it's funny, I always try to take a step back away from like the betting process, and when that happens, it feels like something's going wrong in that direction. So it's really just every day. I wish it could be more organized. I worked in an organized like Fortune 500 company before, and there was like a formula of how every day just kind of opened up, and you did this, and then you did this, and then you did this, and you actually would be able to get a whole lot of things done if you were organized in that manner. But honestly, there's too many new little nicks to shut down every single day. Some day, not every day's the end of the world, but it's like you said, this gathering accounts is it's not a fun job. People glorify sports betting, but I think if they really knew what it was, I don't know if it'd be so glorified.
I was gonna say, has it taken away your love for it a bit?
So yes, definitely. I'm no longer.
You love it more now that you're gathering accounts every day.
No, I mean, you just start to love different elements of it. I mean, look, think about the first few years betting unders every single day. That's a pretty dark. I'm rooting for this guy to fail and this guy to fail and this guy to twist his ankle, because he's close. So you start rooting for really weird things. I remember one time I had a QB rush yards under, and the game was going in a way where it seemed to me that they were going to lead at the end, and the QB was going to take a couple kneels and get underneath his total rush yards. So, I mean, just think about the insanity of what you're watching, what you're actually rooting for while watching the game, for the QB to kneel twice at the end of the game. You're like, I need them to be up by 7. So they kneel a couple times at the end. So when you start watching sports through that lens, the love kind of starts to disappear. If me personally, I go to a game, which I don't do enough, probably like once a month, I'd like to have no bets on that game, nothing on that game. It's the only way for me to like really enjoy the game, which is funny because most sports bettors, they want action to view the game, but I feel the reverse.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Watching my favorite football team, Arsenal, I hate it when I have a bet on the game because I just want to enjoy that one time a week where I can just barrack for my team. Even the other day, I had a prop on one of our players to score. To have a shot on target, and it was just the worst thing ever because I couldn't even enjoy the fact that they were just winning.
Yeah, I hear you.
So back to getting or finding new accounts. What's it like? I guess trusting random people to in that sense, because I would find that probably the most stressful part of what you do.
Yeah, so that's a math equation too. So let's work backwards. I'd say, now these are guesstimates. I'd say if you're getting stiff more than 10% of the time, you're taking too much risk. But if you're never getting stiff, you're probably not taking on enough risk and giving up too many spots. So I used to be extremely nitty when it came to account gathering. And some guy who's actually no longer in the business, but one day he was like, why do you keep passing up on accounts? Think about it like this. If a couple don't work out, as long as more work out overall, you're actually net going to be gaining. So I guess that strategy is not great for a beginner. But today I'll take on a little bit more risk from some random Twitter guy. Or here's the thing, gambling Twitter, usually you know someone who knows someone who knows someone. Otherwise, you just kind of know the person in real life and you just kind of assess their character. That's kind of the job you figure out. And again, you need to be providing value. So think about it like this. Are they really going to run off for a couple $100 when if they stay with you long enough, they're going to make thousands, tens of thousands? So as long as you're providing value and you do some basic risk assessment, a lot of that's subjective. It's not, it's not absolute. It's not, sorry, opposite. It's not absolute. So you are trying to pick spots, and over time, just like maybe your model gets better, you should be getting better at assessing individuals that you decide to work with. And you know what? Sometimes I'll get a couple messages on, I call it the story. Someone will tell you a story that doesn't make sense, and I just sort of run the other way. So it's really a lot of times about piecing together a few key words and sentences that if you just sat down and thought about it, you say, wait a second, this makes no sense. I'll give you a good example. Someone wants to settle every 2 weeks. That would probably be a scenario where they're trying to balance out somewhere else where the money's coming from. Because if you settle out every 2 weeks, you're really settling out the third week. And allowing lots of run up on a small account, that's just not logical. So that would be like just a very obvious spot where I'll see people say, all right, we don't settle that often, it'll probably work out. But if you just kind of think about that story, it sounds like there's probably an issue there. And sometimes there isn't. It just is what it is. But that's where it just comes into sort of guessing to the best of your ability. Is this a spot and a person that I want to work with, and not just be extremely fearful of taking on partnerships. Again, we're talking about like a business level. You as a beginner, I wouldn't do this. You can't take shots and then have 5% of your bankroll, be, lost, stolen, doesn't work out, whatever. So, I mean, for me personally, unfortunately, because of the market that I work in, mostly I'm under betting my bankroll. So it's like, I'm not any one partnership is going to destroy me. I don't want my partners to hear that and everybody starts running. But in general, not any one person is going to wreck not any like horrific month, not any like horrific season. I'm not going homeless if those things happen. So it allows me a little bit more leeway to take shots. Now again, if you're starting to get every other account some kind of issue, you're doing something wrong. You're just not good at judging people's character. And you know what? Sometimes it's just out of people's hands. Something bad happens, and that's it.
Yeah, no, I understand, mate. Do you have any tests at all to see what their trust level is? Or is just kind of like intuition over time? You've kind of
well, a lot of it is again kind of word of mouth, because again, like I said before, people kind of come to me when the major markets are going wrong. So I'm also involved in seeing those markets, and it's hitting some of my accounts. So it's like funny when they're crushing, I'm thinking, oh boy, it's not going to be a good month for me. Nobody needs my niche market, But in general, a lot of the people that reach out to me or find me, or I find them, they've listened to your podcast or someone else's podcast or an article or know someone that I know. And it's like, what's that joke? 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. If you ask enough, eventually somebody's going to know somebody that knows somebody. And a lot of it is like that. The other option is also in the real world. You see a guy looking at his phone the entire time while at a bar. What do you think he's doing, while watching the game? So you start a conversation, but I guess the best tells are these people degenerates or not? Usually, if you're a normal person in the game of life, you're probably operating everything else on a kind of normal landscape. And if you're not, and you're degen in other aspects, there's probably those characteristics cross over. So I would say, like, sometimes it's more obvious than people think. It's just, I think a lot of times people might get desperate and then they have like this bad experience in the industry where they really, they wanted the account so bad that they took on somewhere they knew they shouldn't do it, but it was the easy thing right in front of them. And I think that's really important for people to think about. Sports betting, the industry, it's hard. And that's good, because if it was easy, everyone would be doing it and there'd be no value. So this thing where like people be like, that part's really hard or this part's really hard, those are the most important things. They have to be hard for there to actually be profit. Otherwise, everyone would do it and there'd be no value.
Yeah, no, well said, mate. Is there any kind of legal steps you can take for people that stiff you, or is it kind of just like you just have to cop it? Yeah.
The legal sites are not, and offshores are not going to mostly be doing shady things, except for limiting you, all the time, nonstop. But besides, and that's a whole different issue with how the gaming commission is technically actually against the player in those scenarios instead of protecting the player, which is what they're supposed to be doing. Let me make one comment about that people aren't going to love. I don't think those sports books are doing anything wrong. Those companies have a duty to their shareholders. I don't believe that any company today could spend the way that you would need to develop a market like Pinnacle did 20, people always look at Pinnacle. Sure, that was developed, 15, 20 years ago in a non-competitive landscape. I don't really think these companies today could take on tons of action and balance. I mean, they offer massive boards, huge boards, and tons of options to attract people. So they're making a calculated decision that attracting people, offering these huge exploitable boards is worth the risk of limiting individuals. I don't know, in their eyes, I think they think there's an infinite pool of players. And I mean, I don't run DraftKings and Caesars, so somebody got there for some reason. Not that, again, I necessarily think it's like the greatest business strategy. I wish they could. Actually, no. You know what? If they took on a bunch of sharps, the lines would become efficient over time. What happens when, these Pinnacle bookmakers allow you to bet? You are training them to become more sharp over time. It's a training process, maybe not over a week, maybe not over a month, maybe not over a season, but over the life of 10 years, 20 years, the site becomes sharper and sharper. I would say the number one, if a beginner was looking out there on how to win, especially in the PPH landscape, go look at what's not offered on Bookmaker and Pinnacle. That means that it's, and probably being offered on, Bovada or Bet365, wherever these PPHs are copying their lines from. And you're going to see those markets are easier on the back end because Bovada is not taking sharp players for more than a week or whatever, or a month. They're not being trained on making the lines efficient. So you're pulling copied lines from an inefficient market that has no, I would say, teacher over time, teaching it how to become sharp.
Yeah, no, that's really well said, mate. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I guess a lot of these sportsbook are also using sharper bookmakers as kind of like a guide for them on a lot of markets. Like you would think that, I mean, you see it all the time. If Pinnacle moves in a lot of these markets, the other ones are just going to follow straight away. So I like you said, if you can find markets where, it's potentially being offered at a bookmaker and not at a sharper bookmaker, then their lines are probably not going to be as sharp. So that can be a good avenue for people.
Yeah, I think a lot of beginners, they don't ask the question what they really want in this industry. They say they want to win or they say they want to make money, but they don't do the actions that are required to do so, which really means they don't really know what they want. They're just saying what they want, but they don't have like a strong connect to what it means, whatever these wants are. And that's okay. A lot of people just want to turn a small profit, run this as a hobby. And it's really important to kind of respect the different goals and, desires of a lot of these, casuals, aspiring people. But I think a lot of people just don't understand the components of this business. So they can't, even if they say what they want, they don't really know what they want or what it means to want these things.
Yeah, I guess this is the reason why people end up turning to touts and tipsters and all this kind of stuff, because it's
Yeah.
I mean, fair enough, because if you're not if you're not wanting to become a professional or anything like that, which most people aren't, it takes a lot of it does take a lot of effort to beat the market, especially when you're competing with guys like yourself, guys that do this as a full-time job, because that's who your real competitors are. And yeah, if you're just looking to do this as a hobby, then I know it's very hard to find a good tout or tipster, but maybe I guess it's probably the best way to go about it. If you can find someone that's actually decent at what they do, then it's probably the best way to go about it. Because, spending 5-10 minutes of research yourself is probably not going to beat the market over time. Whereas if you can refer to someone that actually, spends a lot of time on it, but then you got the bigger problem that, lines moving, they become too popular. They might not even be that good. It's a merry-go-round, isn't it, mate?
The whole business is complicated. Every component of it.
Yeah, no, it's sorry, my camera's just gone off, but I am still here. The average lifetime of each account, you mentioned before, would you rather have 1 month to make 8K, or 3 months or whatever it was to make 10K? Do you think it's harder for these bookies to figure out whether you're sharp or not if you're just betting props? Because I guess there's no, like we mentioned before, there's no real benchmark. If I was a trader, mate, that's the first thing I would do. If I'm trying to figure out whether you're sharp or not, I'm probably just going to quickly see if you're getting CLV. If you are, I'm probably going to limit you, et cetera, et cetera. But on props, a lot harder to tell.
Yeah, you kind of beat me to it. There's some legitimate, people out there, and they beat the college basketball, college football line by 3-4 points. It doesn't take too much from the other end to, come together and be like, wait a second, they're getting a field goal on this game. And then every single line, or 95% of the lines not related to news, are moving with them. So that's the same argument I use. Most people tell me to be quiet, you're betting props. So I don't know. What do I know? But I agree with what you said.
Yeah, no, exactly. Mate, just looking at, couple more questions before we head off. I'd like to hear just from your perspective, because you're someone that's not I guess doing things in a general sense in the industry. Like most people are betting on big markets and et cetera, and perform their business in a completely different way to the way you do it. If you've got any advice for anyone starting out that's looking to get involved, what would be, I guess, your advice for how they should get started and the first steps that they should take?
Right. So I would say, first of all, you kind of have to answer 2 or 3 questions. One, you have to have awareness. What are your skills? Are you the gift of gab guy? Are you the modeler? What are you actually good at? So if you're good at math, you probably should be doing math things and finding small markets that are easy to beat. Now, once you're that kind of person, the next question to ask is this my dream? Is this my goal? Am I actually going to quit my 401? Usually a math guy probably has a 401k job, right? Unless he's like a college kid coming out. But if you're already established, you need to start thinking, do I have enough of the other skills to actually make this a large business that actually replaces my other job, if this is something that I truly love? So you have to ask a lot of tough questions and give yourself a lot of honest answers. And only once you kind of do that can you really start taking an approach on what to do next. There are lots of guys that are really happy just being account finders. They hand the account and they do nothing but, settle up. Other guys, they want to be more involved. But if you're just trying to I think the truth is most, probably the viewers here, they're just trying to make a couple, hobby dollars and turn a profit. And at the end of the day, if that's your goal, and there's nothing wrong with that goal, is find yourself a way to get some CLV, and most likely attack really small markets. I said it on a different pod. It's really easy. Open up Pinnacle, wherever they let you bet $50. If it's underwater basket weaving or upside down pineapple throwing, those are probably the markets that you're not going to experience too much variance on, because nobody knows anything about windsurf kite modeling. It's very few people do, and Penny and these other companies don't really care because they're not taking that much action on it. So if your really just goal is to make money, then you probably want to attack it from that avenue. If you have like some deep love of like sports and you really only, you're betting and watching, then yeah, you're going to, even if you figure out how to turn a profit, you're going to experience a lot of variance. But at the end of the day, starting out, people kind of want like, what should I do? Or how do I go about it? But the first step is answering to yourself really what you're looking to get out of this.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, because if you want, I mean, it's a huge step saying that, going from basically, your full-time job to saying that you wanted to become a professional or start sports betting in a way that's taking away, that's replacing a standard, your day-to-day income or whatever. So people probably think when they're starting, or they're thinking of taking that next step, that it's all about, like you said, it's not really all about the betting side. It becomes so much less enjoyable because it becomes about a business, and the worst part's finding new accounts, maybe trying to like build relationships with people in the industry. It becomes so far separated from just what you're actually betting on. So no, I think that's terrific advice, mate, because if people want to, if people can figure out exactly what they want, then they can have a clear mindset or a clear pathway to see exactly what am I going to have to do to achieve that.
Yeah, and you know what? That same question affects people like me in the industry too. I always think about, what about building a site or tools or all these other components, and that would be, if I build this, it will take away from my edge in what I'm doing. So it's literally like, build this, sacrifice this. So at every stage in this business, those questions need to be asked and reassessed. It's not just at the beginning, it's all the time.
Yeah, well said, mate. Mate, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think it's been really interesting. Yeah, hearing from a completely different kind of sports bettor to the general kind of person that we end up talking to, and just hearing your different thoughts on, getting accounts, and just prop betting in general, the pros and cons of that. It's been really interesting, mate. Where can people find you on Twitter? And I guess if there's anything interesting you've got coming up that you wanted to plug, or anything exciting like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the next component, I got to get better at the social media game, I think. Start a site or something. No, but you can find me on Twitter at MLBKSPsychic. And yeah, just follow along. I'm always looking to interact with people, building out network, discussing what I do. It's basically some people have a 9-to-5 job. This is a 24/7 job. This is kind of all I think about, all I talk about, that's it. Thank you for having me on. Really appreciate your time.
No, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. Sorry that the dog's starting to bark. So I'm sorry for everyone if you've heard that throughout the podcast. I think he needs to go to the toilet. But anyway, thanks for listening, everyone. And thanks once again for coming on, Porter. Make sure, if this is your first time on the podcast, please do a quick rate and review of the podcast. And if you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, all the good stuff. And we should be back with some episodes in a couple of weeks. So thanks everyone. And thanks, Porter, once again, and hopefully have you on sometime in the future.
Definitely. Bye.